I would like to start off the week with the review. And I'm going to try to do it quickly so that way it doesn't feed into way too much of the time in drawing. So, to start off Monday, let's do the very first principles and good habits that you want to maintain, that you want to think about before you even start drawing. Like, what am I supposed to be keeping in mind when I draw? And the number one thing, you guessed it, is keeping it light. Not pressing hard. And it's a very tempting thing to do, especially if you're a beginner, is to press hard on paper, because it makes you feel as though you're in more control over the pencil, you're in more control over the lines and their precision. And don't give in to that. I think it's important to remember that sketching lightly has so many benefits in the long run that you want to just train yourself to have that as your habit for drawing. You don't want to press hard because, again, it'll ingrain itself into the paper. It'll literally just make a permanent mark in the paper. And when the line isn't right, when, let's say, the proportions are off, or it's kind of bleeding off of the page, or just or shifting off the page in ways that you don't want it to, and you want to erase all that, you can, but it's still going to be there. And that's just going to get in the way of you creating new lines, creating new shapes, that sort of thing. And also, aside from just that, aside from the drawing itself, just the experience of it is so much better when you have more of a loose control. You move faster, and it's more of a pleasant experience as opposed to like giving the pencil a death grip. You know, you don't want to do that. That's another thing to keep in mind. First is drawing loosely, keeping it light, and the second one is don't give it the death grip. Don't press on pencil so hard. You're just gonna squeeze it. Just keep it loose and keep your distance from the tip. You don't want to do this. When you do this, you're obstructing your own vision. So when you are making lines, you can't see what the results are in comparison to everything else that you've drawn. And keeping it at a distance also gives you better range of motion as opposed to this, right? You notice that? You see how much easier it is to, let's say, draw up and down as opposed to this. You could just feel it in your wrist too, that it's an uncomfortable pose, it's an uncomfortable position. Whereas this is so much easier. You can fill in shapes faster, you could do shading faster. Overall, it's just a really pleasant experience in comparison to this and the death grip combined. It will be uncomfortable. You're going to feel uncertain, right? You're going to feel uncertainty when you have it this loose. You're going to be like, oh, the lines aren't really coming out as much as I want, but stick to it. Just like anything else, you'll eventually, if you do it long enough, if you do it often enough, it'll just become easier and faster and better. Trust me on that. This is something that I've went through for a really long time, and sometimes I still do it. Occasionally here and there, I catch myself and I'm like, wait, I'm all the way at the bottom of the pencil. I'm at the tip. I'm pressing too hard, But this is why it's important to just remind yourself prior, like, what are the things that I have to really keep in mind? And those two things, or three rather, sketch lightly, don't press too hard, don't hold the pencil close to the tip. Those three things are like the most important things that you can train yourself to do. Good habits. So with that said, let's jump into the quick review. This is for anatomy. For the figure, very helpful. Another thing that took me a while to just appreciate, I started out by just, tracing the outer lines. So like if I was drawing the arm, I would just draw like the outside bicep, and then, you know, just basically draw the lines, the exterior of everything, and then eventually go into detail. There's a pitfall to it, because if you start out here, and let's say you're drawing from a reference and your hand-eye coordination is right, you might make the torso too short or the arm too long, etc., as you're going from the exterior to exterior, you know, and you're not really thinking in terms of proportion to the rest of the body. You're just kind of copying the lines as you see them. And to an untrained eye especially, that's a really danger zone. You're just going to struggle with the drawing a lot more. You're going to erase a lot more, because you're just like, oh, it's longer over here than it is over here. This is too short. It's kind of crooked. You know, and you just have to keep erasing stuff and then redoing them. So it becomes a little frustrating. Whereas if you just take on the idea of the head being the unit of measurement for the rest of the body, you save yourself a lot of time. You're able to understand a figure a lot better and a lot quicker. It's just more of a simplified, condensed way of understanding and drawing the figure and anatomy in proportion to itself. So using this head measurement, once you draw the head on paper, regardless of how big it is in reference, once you draw the head on paper, it's going to be your unit of measurement for your drawing. You could still refer to your reference, right? You could measure the head in the reference and then measure that size of the head to the rest of the body to see where things end on the body. And then you could do the same thing for your drawing and be like, okay, well, if the head over there measured from here to here, then it should be the same on my drawing. So you measure the head on your drawing, because it might vary in size. You might make it smaller or bigger in comparison to the reference. And then you do the same thing. You measure it just the same way as you did on the reference. Once you establish that, then you can use it as your unit of measurement for everything else. And as you could see, the torso, and this is just a general rule, this is the ideal form of the body. You could do some tweaking here and there once you understand this, because then it's going to be more balanced drawing. Whereas if you don't understand the principles, things are going to look wonky, they're going to look weird. You want to avoid that. You want to draw as much of a convincing image as you possibly can at the beginning. So 3 heads across for the width of the body, 2 heads for the height of the body, 2 heads for the width of the body if you don't include the shoulders. Then as you could see, the foot is about the same size as the head, maybe a smidge higher or taller than the head if you count in the toes, the front 2 toes. Then the hand is like 3/4 the size of the head. As far as the upper part of the leg, it's 1 head width, 2 heads height, 3/4 the width for the bottom half of the leg, and also 2 heads for the bottom part of the leg as well. Now this is like the 8 head figure. There's a 7 head figure, 7.5. But this is generally it. For the 7 and 7.5 head figure, the top part of the leg is only 1 head, and then the bottom part is 2. That's the only difference. Everything else is pretty much the same. All the measurements as far as the width of the body, the head, the height of the body, all that is the same. The only difference would be just the upper part of the leg. Now over here, we got more of a condensed, more simplified version to understand measurements better. The entire torso from the top of the head to the groin area is 4 heads. You got 2 heads for the top half of the torso, and then 2 heads for the bottom. So from the chin down to the chest, that's 2 heads. Then from the chest down to about where the waist is, that's 3, and then from the waist down to the groin, that's 4. Same thing for the legs, as we just discussed. So 4 and 4 in total, to simplify it even more. It's just in terms of halving it, it's 4 heads until from the head to the groin, and then from the groin down to the feet, it's another 4 heads. For the width of the forearm, it's half a head. So it's important to remember when you are drawing in the beginning, you're learning the figure, and for some time until you really feel comfortable, until the times when you do practice without all these guides, and you measure and you see like, oh wow, I actually nailed it, you know, without having to draw all these very technical specific lines. I got it right. That's going to take some time. That's not in a week. That's not in 2 weeks. You challenge yourself for sure, and that's going to be great. That's going to definitely skyrocket your drawing. The more you challenge yourself, the more you want to remember these things, the more you want to test yourself, the better. You know, the better your results are going to be. And what I mean is, you know, draw these out, and then close this, or turn to a new page, and try to remember exactly this model in your head. You know, you want all this, everything you see on this page is just ways for